G'day, we're in the brewery again, and you just saw me pour these two beers. I have topped them up a little bit because after I took photos of them and that, they just needed a bit of a top up. Now they're both crystal clear. It might be a bit hard to see there. Let me try and focus on the beer instead of me. They are both crystal clear. There's just a lot of condensation in here. It's very hot this afternoon. These two beers came out of the same batch. Anyone that watches my live broadcasts, or maybe my patrons know, I've been talking about this for several years. They're probably going to tell me it's been 5 or 10 years. But I just hadn't got round to doing it before. And so what it was a single batch in the 65 litre Brewzilla. Of course you could use other systems. But I ended up with these two very different beers. This was the first time I'd made both these beers. So it was the first time I'd made this one and this one. So it was a little bit of an experiment. They've come out quite nice. We'll do a bit more of a review at the end, but we'll have a look at how I made them first.
4 kilo of ale, 4 kilo of Pilsner malt. Very simple grain bill. I think if you actually wanted a bit more, as dark as VB, you'd probably go all ale malt rather than the Pilsner malt. I'm just splitting it up so I don't use my whole bag of ale malt. And of course, if you want it a little bit darker, you could add a little bit of Munich or a little bit of whatever you like. Just keep it small though. You don't really want to be adding a lot of crystal. If you have issues with head formation or retention, of course you could add some carapils as well. That's not going to hurt. You might add, for a double batch, you might add, I don't know, 500 grams, 600 grams. A single batch, 200 to 300 grams. I don't usually have any problems, so I'm just going to leave it out today. And to keep it a little bit more traditional, we will be adding some sugar or dextrose later. But in times past, sugar was added to nearly all our beers, even Coopers. Coopers have apparently stopped using it these days, but that was only probably 10, 20 years ago, whenever it was, that they stopped using that.
I normally start my double batches with around 40 litres of water, which is about 10.5 gallons. I add some lactic acid and some salts to get my pH right, and I went for a low mash temp of 63 degrees Celsius, and that's about 145 Fahrenheit. So my strike water temperature was 67 degrees Celsius, which is about 153 degrees Fahrenheit. Then I mash in my grain and everything's very easy. Very simple malt bill.
Probably about half. I'm going to let this go for about 60 minutes, 75 minutes. It's already been, 5 to 10 minutes now. So about another hour.
So after 15 minutes, I take a sample for a pH reading. See the link to the recipe in the description if you'd like to see what actual salts I used. The pH ended up at 5.39. I was very happy with that.
We are over halfway through now. We'll have a look. Looking at it, we haven't backed up at all. We're nice and clear. Got a nice flow. There's only about 20 minutes left. You probably don't need to do this, as I always say, but it just makes me feel better. We've still got about 20 minutes of the mash left and then about 20 minutes for mash out. So if you do muck it up, it's going to clear again, but we've got a nice flow. Some people aren't comfortable with stirring halfway through, and that's okay.
So there was nothing to see. It was very non-eventful. So I went into mash out, and it took about 10 minutes to ramp up to my 76 degrees mash out temp, and then I did 10 minutes mash out.
I sparged with just over 25 litres, and I came up to the gallons. I think that's enough. There is plenty more coming out of my mash pipe down on the driveway down there. So just watch it. So I started with 40 in here, up to the 40 litre mark in here anyway, and then sparged with about 25 litres, and that was plenty. That's where I fill up to, about the gallons. You could go a little bit higher, but often it'll splash out when you're boiling. Of course, when you're going, this full firm cap is very, very handy.
You can see coming up to the boil, I filtered out very little junk. And I've played this at 3 times the speed, just to show you how good firm cap is. If I didn't have firm cap in there, that would boil over for sure.
We'll take a reading. Well, we're at 38. Because the pre-boil gravity is 1038, I'm not going to add any dextrose, and we'll just see how we go. There's 40 grams of Pride Ringwood. It's actually been smelling really great here on the bench. I've been sitting just near it, and you can smell it. It smells awesome.
This is where things get interesting. I'm going to do a little mini mash on the side while the main batch is boiling.
Half a kilo of ale malt, 400 grams of medium crystal, 50 grams of Carafa Special 3, 30 grams of Gladfield Eclipse wheat, which is like a midnight wheat. All up we've got about 980 grams of grain, nearly a kilo. I'm going to mill this grain separately, of course, in this different mill. I'm going to mill it nice and fine. This is my fine grain mill. You can use the 1 mil, of course, if you like adjusting. But since this is going to be like a brew in the bag, or it is going to be a brew in the bag, it doesn't matter if all the other grains are up fine, milled up fine as well. It'll actually help, I think, because this is going to be a pretty rough and ready mash or steep. The finer the better, probably, as long as I've got a nice fine grain bag that doesn't let too much junk through. I've got a 7.6 litre pot, the old one from all my early videos. It's about 7.6 litres, I think, from Big W. They were less than $20. I have an old paint straining bag that I used to use. You can tell it's been used, it's discoloured. I have that near kilo of grain I ground up just before. Over on the freezer behind me, I've put a towel down, a piece of wood and a towel, just to insulate the bottom of the pot. 2 litres of water that's about 80 degrees. There's another 2 litres, so we've got about 4 litres there. I'm going to put the grain bag in. I'm going to just take a reading. I'm hoping it's cooled down a bit. 72 at the moment. I'm just going to give it a minute. If you're just going to steep, you don't have to worry about this as long as it's under 80 degrees, but I'm going to try and get a little bit of a mash out of it. By the time I get that grain in, we're going to be well and truly in mash area. I did grind it fairly fine, so just make sure you get rid of the dough balls. I mean, you could do this with 3 litres, but I thought just a little bit extra is not going to hurt. It'll just give me a little bit more to play with, a little bit more to stir. That's probably enough. We'll just take a quick reading, but I want to get the lid on pretty fast. The reading's saying 64, 65. So if I get a lid on that, that'll be perfect. And I'll move it over to the freezer over here. Over on the freezer, you can see I've set it on the towel, and I'll just cover it over. Maybe throw another blanket over it. I'm just going to leave it. It's not entirely important. A steep would do it, but we're going to try and get a little bit of a mash out of that grain. See if we can raise the gravity a bit of the beer without adding anything else. Half an hour is probably fine for a steep or a little mash like that. But I'm just going to leave it till I'm ready. As soon as I'm ready to whack it in my other pot, we'll just go ahead with it. But the boil's probably 15 minutes in now, so the boil's got 45 minutes to go anyway. So we'll wait till that's done, and then we'll get onto it. Alright, that is 15 minutes to go, and there's another 20 grams Pride Ringwood. Now what I'm going to do, about 5 minutes before the end, I'll take a reading. I'll see where we are. I want us to end up about 1046. Now I had planned on adding about 600 grams of dextrose, but I think our numbers are going to be better than that. So I'm just waiting to the last 5 minutes, I'll take a reading and I'll decide how much Dex I'm going to add. Just to, you know, we want to finish it off about 4.9%, and we're hoping to ferment out to about 1.07. We might not get that low, but that's what I'm hoping for. So we want about a 1046 original gravity, starting gravity. While we're here, I have some of these yeast nutrient tablets. I haven't tried them before. It's usually one per normal batch, so I'll put in 2. I got these from Kegland. I'll leave a link below if you want to have a look. 1, 2. It's about 5 minutes left. Just about to set up the chiller. Take a reading. We're about 41, so I am going to end up having to add some dextrose. Our boil looks a bit low today. I think that's probably why. So I'm going to add about, it's about 500 grams of dex. Sugar is fine. It's probably what they normally would have used, at least in the old days. Don't stir too much. You don't want to lift up that bottom plate. Just going to let that come to the boil. I might boil for another 5 minutes longer than intended, because I've sort of taken the boil off by adding the dex and stirring. Probably not all dissolved yet. Let's take another reading. That's much better. If I had have put in my initial 600 grams, we would have been at the 1046. I'll just leave it a couple of minutes to boil, and we'll probably be at that 1046 by the time we get in the fermenter anyway. That will do for the boil. Just going to let that wort settle out and stop moving. Back in a few minutes. I want to leave this hot, so it's going to be one pass. We're not going to recirculate into the kettle. So you have to be careful that you make sure you are chilling it really well. Or make sure you have some sort of restriction, otherwise it'll come out too hot. Especially in the middle of summer like it is now. I'm just going to open really slowly. I'm not going to be able to put the yeast in straight away because I'm going to need like about 15 degrees. I'm using a lager yeast. So it's going to have to chill in the fermenter fridge, but I still want to get it in here as cool as it can be. Use my hands. If it feels anything more than cool, I'm coming out too hot. I reckon we're probably coming out, just feels a touch cool, probably about 19 degrees, maybe 20. Right, we'll let that go and we'll be back. Meanwhile, while I'm filling the fermenter up with the VB, this has been mashing. Now I'm going to move it from here so you can see it better. I haven't opened it. It doesn't really matter if it's dropped below mash temps. It will be fine. Now it looks nice and dark. That should add a lot of good colour. Give it a bit of a stir. There's a couple of ways you could do this. You could take the grain out now in the bag and go and boil this on the stove inside, or if you've got an induction plate or something in your garage. Or you can do what I'm going to do, I think, and then I'm going to add it into the kettle and bring it back to the boil for 10 minutes. That way I'll boil off, yeah, it'll get a little bit more bitter, but not much more bitter, because I'm adding more fluid, so that's going to dilute the bitterness that's already in the kettle. And then when I boil for that 10-15 minutes, it'll boil off some of this liquid and it will get down a little bit more bitter again, but it's all going to work out about the same. So we know we're starting at probably around, well, it's a bit of a guess, but around 26 to 30 IBUs as a base for our red beer, and then with all the flavour hops I'm going to throw in a minute, in a 90-degree whirlpool, that'll give us a little bit more bitterness and a lot of flavour. The easiest way to do this, of course, is just to pick it up. Be careful, it'll still be hot. You're going to be holding a fair bit of fluid. It's about 1 kilo of grain, so naturally it'll hold about nearly 1 litre of water, or 1/4 water. But you can also squeeze it out a bit too if you want to. Or you could even sparge if you really were keen. I'm just going to let it drain for now, and I'll give it a squeeze before it's ready to put in. We now have my 22 litres I wanted. Would have been 23, but I wasted a bit, that's okay. Just popping that lid on, I'm going to stick it in the fridge to cool down. I don't want to pitch yeast till it's about 16 or 17 and then bring it down to 15 degrees. So I'll whack that in the fridge and we'll move on with the rest. We're back to the boil pot. I'm going to bring it back up to the boil. As fast as I can. Squeeze out some of that goodness. And put that in the boil kettle. Now that goes into there. That's just the proteins that are settled out on the bottom. It'll be okay, don't worry about it. I'm not sure if you can pick it up, but instant colour change. Awesome. We're struggling to get a bit of a rolling boil going, and I have two theories for that. One, there could be a little bit of junk on the elements after I've, it had been sitting here for probably 15 minutes after the last boil and everything's settled out. And two, the bottom plate, the false bottom, might be a bit clogged up too, so it can't quite get the rolling boil, but it is boiling. It says it's 100 degrees down the bottom. It just doesn't look like it is. That's enough easily for a brew. So now I'm just going to set the timer. I'm going to give it 10-15 minutes. I'll just see how we're going. Then I'll stop it. We'll do a whirlpool with some more hops. Just going to take a reading. So we're 47, so we are a couple of points up. By the time it's boiled for that extra 10 minutes it's got to go now, it's likely to be 1050. If you wanted it more, you could add some more Dex or something. I think I might chuck a little bit of Dex in, just about 100 grams or something. We'll see where it gets us, just so it's a lot different from the VB. We're going VB to more or less a red IPA, pale ale. Just remember, it is possible to do this without adding any Dex or any sugar at all. There's no need to do it, but there's also no need to be scared of it. There's 106 grams. That'll just bump it up that little bit more. So that was about 5 or so minutes where it was nearly boiling, and then the last 10 it really took off. So it's been about a 15-minute boil, just enough to kill off any bugs that was in that steep or that mash. So now I'm going to turn the elements off. For the time being, I'm going to just turned off yet. Swap out that. I'm just going to put it down there. Hold it there. That's just to keep it nice and clean, because I'm going to use that chiller again in a minute at the end. I'm going to put in my whirlpool arm. I'm just going to whirlpool it till it gets down to maybe, I want it under 90 degrees, maybe about 85 degrees before I chuck the hops in for this one. It's a bit of an experiment. While I'm waiting for that to chill down, I'm just going to take a reading with a nice fresh pipette. See where we're at. So the junk's settled out a bit in the whirlpool. Not quite as dark as I was planning, but by the time you get that into a pint glass or a schooner, it's probably going to be okay. So it's reading 1050. By the time I do the whirlpool, it might be 1051. That's good. Just going to check the temp. It's saying about 80 down the bottom. 85. Right here I have a mix of hops. It's a bit of a mix-up. I was just using up hops in the freezer. It's 10 grams of Cryo Cascade, which is equal to 20 grams of normal Cascade. It's 32 grams of Mosaic Cryo, which is, it's about 60 grams of normal Mosaic. I didn't mean to pour that much in, but that's what I got. And 40 grams of Citra. So it's around 120 grams of normal hops. I'm just going to sprinkle that in. And I'm going to whirlpool that probably 10 minutes with the pump on, and then let it settle for 5 minutes. Then we'll chill it down. Well, that's been whirlpooling for 10 minutes. Now I'm going to stop the whirlpool and just let it settle. Try and get some of that gunk out of it. And we'll chill it. That's time up. So it's the same again. I'm going to close this off here. The hose is already going. I'm going to give this a bit of a spray. Should be okay because it's been over the steam, but give it a spray for a bit of a sanitize. I can go in a bit faster with this because I'm going to be using quake yeast, but I still don't want to melt my fermenter, of course. But I want it at about 30 degrees. It's not full bore. I don't want to get too carried away. My groundwater will be very hot today. Be over 20 degrees. We're still going. We're at 22 litres. I think we'll get about 22, 23. It's about the usual. Well, plus of the collection jar, so we might be a little bit more. I think we're getting near the bottom because it's starting to look a bit murky coming through. I could stop it. How much have we got? What's that? 21, 21, 22. Yeah, that's about it. That'll do. I'm not going to tip up the Brewzilla, which I could probably get another litre out. I'm not going to worry about it. Alright, just going to quickly check the temperature of this, the red one. You might not be able to see it. 28, 28.2. Alright, we're going slow. 28.4. Alright, that's 28 degrees. That's perfect. Now, I haven't tested these before. These are liquid Ebb Garden samples I got sent. But I'm just going to whack it in and hope for the best. If you didn't want to do this, I just don't have a spare fermentation fridge at the moment. If you didn't want to do this, this beer would be perfectly fine with a US-05 or a Nottingham or something like that. Perfectly fine. This is all the way from Norway, Ebb Garden. And thank you very much for sending it to me. And that didn't look like much, so I'm going to put 2 in. That's an all-rounder cover, but you can see it actually fits pretty well. I'm just going to leave this. I might take it inside to keep it a bit warmer than the garage gets overnight. 28 degrees, and we're just going to let that yeast go and see what happens, eh? Of course, do not forget your spunding valve. I'm going to set this about 8, 10 psi, something like that. As you can see, there's actually heaps left. Could have got another litre or 2 out of it. Alright, we are at temperature. It's at about 17, but I'm going to put the yeast in and then let it go down to 15 degrees. I'm using Lallmann's Diamond Lager yeast. It's apparently from Austria. Now, you could probably get away with 2 packets, but with lagers, it's always good to pitch more. Whenever you're doing a lager, you should probably do a starter. I haven't had time. I've been interstate. I've come home yesterday. I need to get this in, so I'm using 3 packs. It's a little bit of insurance for me, but you're much better off making a starter. A bit lower. That's better. I should mention too, I've swapped out my gas side for yellow connectors. That way there's no, if you get a bit of muck up there and you can't see what you're doing, or condensation. I know the yellow's going to be gas all the time.
It's Monday night, so this was put in on Thursday afternoon. Didn't really do anything till Friday afternoon. Saturday, Sunday, Monday. But with that big gap in the top there, I'd say she's just about done. I might be a little bit too late, but I'm going to dry hop. Some people like that newer method of cooling down the wort to dry hop. The last time I did it with a quake beer, it didn't work for me. I just didn't like the results. So I'm not going to test it again now. I'm just going to do it how I normally would and throw the hops in and give it another couple of days. 15 grams of Cryo Cascade, which is equal to about 30 grams of normal, and 60 grams of Citra. Stirred her up a little bit, but that's good. Gets those hops moving around. That's a good thing.
That's the red. That's got to be somewhere 10, 12, 10, 11.
Looking at that, even though, yeah, it's probably 10.09, 10.09, or even, getting close to the 8 even. So as you can see, it was quite a simple process, and it could be made, you can make many, many different beers, from a lager to an IPA, from a lager to a pale ale. You've already, probably want to start, of course, with something lighter than your second beer. You could go a Hellies and a stout. You could go, the combinations could be endless. But we'll do a quick review of these. This first one here, which, if I can get the condensation off it, you can see is, they're crystal clear. Now, I did find these beers. That's another experiment I've been doing. Anybody who knows me also knows that I never use finings after the kettle. I very, very rarely add them to the fermenter or to the keg. I don't like it, and it can cause some oxidation, that dreaded word. But I've figured out a way how to avoid that. I've done a few experiments, busted a few myths, and that'll be another video. But anyway, this was the first version of Dave, my mate's version of Lucky's VB. I've called it Dave's Bitter. Firstly, I knew the yeast wouldn't be right, but I was using the diamond yeast, the Lallemand diamond lager yeast. First time I'd ever used it, for a change. But it's okay. I thought it was a bit stinky at first, like most lager yeasts, but it's sort of come good. A little bit of lagering. It's only been, this fermented in about a week. I can show you the graph on the telly. I did give it time and I did ramp it, but it sat there and it looks like it's really high there. It looks like it finished at whatever it says on that graph, 1020 I think it is. But it didn't really. There was a lot of gunk stuck on the tilt. But I could still tell, because it hadn't moved for nearly a week, that it was done. Even if it's got gunk on it, it'll still vary. If the gravity's going down, it'll still vary, even if it might not be 100% accurate on the numbers. So it ended up getting down to about 1010, 10.9. I'd planned it on 007, getting it down to 1.007. But it got down, it looks about 109 if we have a close look at that. And I'm fine with that gravity. I wish I had used all ale malt like I first originally, that was my idea, but I didn't want to use my, half a bag of grain on an experimental batch. So I did half ale and half Pilsner malt. The next one I'm going to do, I'll do a proper separate video on Dave's Bitter as well, but it will be all ale malt. I might add, I haven't decided whether I'll add a couple of other little bits of grain. I probably won't, but I'll decide when I make the full-on, proper recipe for it. But as I said, this didn't have carapils or anything like that. It was just straight grain. Oh, and a little bit of sugar. Because I thought, if you're going to do a VB or an Australian lager clone, to make it traditional, you've got to add some sugar. So there was a touch of dextrose and sugar added. But I sort of did that via the numbers. I only used 8 kilo of grain for this double batch. So it was quite a small amount. And so I left that space there. If I didn't quite get out of the grain what I thought, I could left that space there for the sugar.
and because it's traditional. It was a sort of it gave me a bit of backup and a bit of insurance. Now the hops was all prior to Ringwood, if you haven't seen the recipe yet. I might put a little bit more at the end. I think I put 15 grams, 10 or 15 grams at the end. Like the last 10 minutes or something it was, if you have a look at the recipe. I'm going to adjust that up a bit. I might add, another 5 grams on at the end. I think the original one was 10, and I'm going to do the next one, the recipe I'm working on, I'll put 15 at the end. I'm going to up the bitterness a bit. Originally, years ago, when I found out the bitterness for VB, I was doing a brew course with someone that worked there. And they told me it was up in the 30s, the bitterness. And then you look, I sort of look through forums, everyone's going in the 20s, and I'm going, I'm sure he said 30s. So I played it safe with this one, and I think it was just sort of the mid to high 20s. I'm going to push it just a touch more up into the 30. Besides that, it's not, as I said, it's not a clone to VB. You'll never clone it because we just can't do what they do in the brewery. A very scientific brewery, and they're adding deoxygenated water at the end, and then they're adding hop flavour at the end, aroma. It's just something that's hard to do at home, but we can get close. And even if you don't like VB, you could use a cluster hop or a different hop and make, or a 4X. This is more probably closer to a 4X Gold or something like that than VB, until I make these little tweaks for the next batch, the proper batch. It'll be more like VB in the proper batch. This one's more like one of the lighter styles, the 4X Gold or something like that, the 2Es. But there'll be a proper video coming out for that very shortly. Now we move on to the red ale. I'm not quite sure what you call it. A red hoppy ale. That is crystal clear too. It was fine. It just doesn't look it on the camera so much. There's a couple of things that made this not quite what I wanted it. I didn't have the right crystal malt, and I didn't have the right roast malt that I usually use in my amber ales, and I was going to use that because I really like the colour of my amber ales. But this got pretty close. It's just a touch more gold, not quite as red as I wanted, but in the right glass it looks very red. I was going to play it safe and use like a USO5 or a Nottingham or something like that yeast, but I thought I'd take a chance, and I'd been sent some Ebgarden Quake yeast, Quake, I've got to get that V in there, all the way from Norway by Torgrim, I think that's how you pronounce his name. Thank you very much, I've got to thank him for that. I will do another video on this strain and use it in a probably more appropriate beer. But at the start I was a bit scared, I wasn't quite sure about it. But now it's been in the keg nearly 2 weeks, I think, a week and a half. And it's lost the thing I was scared about. It was like it tasted like it was a rye beer. And that's not a bad thing, because I really like my red ryes, don't get me wrong. But they had this real rye, spicy thing. And I don't think it was from the hops, because I didn't use any particularly spicy hops in it. So it's got to have been the yeast. And now it's settled right down. It's still got a spiciness. It still tastes like it's a red rye beer. And I like them. So that's a good thing. It's hoppy. Once the yeast sort of aromas dropped off a bit, the hops are coming out, and I'm really starting to like it. I'm also liking to blend it. I've been blending this with my hef. I've still got a keg of some of that hef left, and I've been mixing it with a bit of the lager, and it's just a really nice beer. So neither of these beers I would say are perfect, but I'm very, very happy with them, and the kegs aren't going to last long. So the experiment was a total success. This is very close to what I wanted, an Australian lager. Well, it is an Australian lager. It's not quite as close to VB as I was aiming for. It's a little bit lighter and just needs a touch more bitterness and touch more flavour. And this is a red hoppy red ale. I'm stoked. And it just makes sense. You know, sometimes, you don't want 2 kegs of a beer, or you just want, I wanted these, my kegs were emptying after the 2 kegs of hef. I wanted 2 kegs of beer, but I didn't want the same beer. Bang, this probably added, 45 minutes to the brew day. I'd probably do it a little bit different next time. I would mash the grain and I would boil it separately. I'd mash at the same time as the initial mash was going. and then I'd just boil it on the stove or something. And that way you don't have to boil the whole, the second batch again in the kettle. You'd boil it so it was already sanitized, and boiled, the bugs killed and everything, and then add it to the kettle, and you could just about move on straight away. I mean, it might pay to boil it for a minute or two to really mix it up. It's probably not needed though. But I'm happy with this one. It'll be interesting. You could even you don't have to do such a difference. You could do a dark ale, like a dark lager type thing, and then do a stout out of the same batch. Add a bit more, even add the flavourings of the second bit, So I finally did it. I've been talking about it for a very long time, my friends know, and I'm happy that I've done it and it worked, and I'm going to do it again for sure. Who knows what's next? As I said, winter's coming up. I might do that dark ale and a stout. I might do a pale ale and a stout. I might do an IPA and a black IPA. Endless. The combinations are endless. All right, thanks for watching. Thanks to my subscribers. Thanks to my patrons. Thanks to everybody. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy. Good health to you. Cheers.